File 005, Network, 1976. What if one of the most accurate predictions about the 21st century wasn't hidden inside a science fiction movie, but inside a television studio nearly 50 years ago? Before social media, before YouTube, before 24-hour news channels, before algorithms learned how to monetize outrage, there was Network. Released in 1976, the film appeared to be a satire about a struggling television network desperate to increase its ratings. Critics praised its performances. Audiences remembered its unforgettable speeches. But over the decades, something far more unsettling began to emerge.
Scene by scene, prediction after prediction, the fictional world created by director Sidney Lumet and screenwriter Paddy Chayefsky started resembling the media landscape we now inhabit every single day. Television gradually stopped competing for information and began competing for attention. News evolved into spectacle. Emotion became more valuable than facts. Public outrage became profitable. The line separating journalism, entertainment, politics, and advertising slowly dissolved until almost no one could clearly see where one ended and the next began. Was Network simply an extraordinary coincidence? Or did its creators understand a hidden mechanism of modern society decades before the rest of the world noticed it?
Tonight, we are not investigating whether this film predicted smartphones, artificial intelligence, or social media. We are investigating something much more dangerous. A system. A machine capable of transforming fear, anger, and human attention into the world's most valuable commodity. Somewhere inside the production history of Network lies a forgotten file that may explain why this film feels less like fiction with every passing year. So tonight, we reopen the archive. Because sometimes the most disturbing predictions are not about technology. They're about us. This is Shadow Reel, and this is File 005. Network, 1976, the movie that predicted the age of outrage. Let's open the file.
Before we unlock the first document, I'd like to ask you something. If films like Network make you question the world around you, if you enjoy uncovering hidden stories, forgotten warnings, and the strange moments when fiction begins to resemble reality, then you're exactly the kind of investigator this archive was built for. Give this video a like. It helps these investigations reach people who are still searching for answers beyond the surface. And I want to hear your thoughts before we go any further. Do you believe Network predicted the world we live in today? Or did it simply expose a truth that had always been there? Share your perspective in the comments. Some of the most interesting discoveries in this archive have started with conversations like those. And if this is your first time entering the Shadow Reel archive, consider subscribing. Every investigation we publish opens another forgotten file. Stories that challenge reality, uncover hidden histories, and reveal the unsettling connections between cinema and the world we now inhabit. The archive is open. Let's examine the first piece of evidence. The forbidden origin of the project. Every investigation begins with a simple question. Why was this file created in the first place? To answer that, we have to return to the early 1970s,
a time when television had become the main source of information for millions of Americans. The Vietnam War and the Watergate scandal had deeply shaken public trust, while television networks were discovering that attracting attention was becoming just as important as reporting the truth. Hidden inside that moment was screenwriter Paddy Chayefsky. Rather than writing a science fiction story, he became fascinated by something far more disturbing: the growing relationship between media, corporate power, and human emotion.
His concern wasn't about technology. It was about what television was slowly doing to society. To bring that vision to life, Chayefsky joined forces with director Sidney Lumet, already celebrated for films like 12 Angry Men, Serpico, and Dog Day Afternoon. Lumet believed the story would only work if it felt completely believable. Instead of exaggerating television, he wanted audiences to recognize it. Filming took place in New York City between January and April 1976, combining real locations with meticulously designed television studios that captured the cold, mechanical atmosphere of broadcast media. Every control room, every monitor, and every executive office was designed to feel authentic rather than cinematic. The cast gave that realism extraordinary power. Peter Finch portrayed news anchor Howard Beale with unforgettable intensity, while Faye Dunaway played the ambitious executive Diana Christensen. William Holden brought humanity to veteran journalist Max Schumacher, and Robert Duvall represented the ruthless corporate mindset driving the network from behind closed doors. Network premiered in New York on November 14, 1976, before its wider U.S. release later that month. Critics praised its bold screenplay, and the film received 10 Academy Award nominations, winning 4 Oscars, including Best Actor for Peter Finch and Best Original Screenplay for Paddy Chayefsky. At the time, most people believed they had watched a brilliant satire about television. Few suspected they had just witnessed the first blueprint of the media world we now live in. And as we open the next document, the evidence becomes even harder to ignore. If this investigation made you see network differently, write, "The broadcast never ended" in the comments. Because the next file doesn't explore how the film was made. It investigates how its predictions quietly became reality. The predictions that were never supposed to come true. Now that we've uncovered how network came into existence, a more unsettling question begins to emerge. What exactly did Paddy Chayefsky see that so many people overlooked? Watching the film today feels strangely different than it did in 1976. Scenes that were once considered exaggerated now resemble ordinary headlines. Television no longer competes only to inform. It competes for attention, emotion, and time. The louder the reaction, the greater the audience. The greater the audience, the greater the profit. That is the mechanism hiding beneath the story. Howard Beale's emotional breakdown is transformed into entertainment. Instead of helping a man in crisis, the network discovers that his anger attracts viewers. His suffering becomes programming. His authenticity becomes a product. Today, that idea feels remarkably familiar. Across television, streaming platforms, and social media, emotional intensity often travels farther than calm analysis. Outrage spreads faster than nuance. Controversy generates clicks. Algorithms reward engagement, whether the reaction comes from admiration, fear, or anger. Of course, Network never predicted YouTube, TikTok, or artificial intelligence, but it understood something much deeper than any specific technology. It understood that once human attention becomes the most valuable resource, every system begins competing to capture it. The film also explored another transformation that would become impossible to ignore: the gradual disappearance of the boundary between journalism and entertainment. News programs became performances. Television personalities became celebrities. Public debates increasingly resembled scripted spectacles, where emotion often carried more weight than evidence. Looking back nearly 5 decades later, it's difficult not to notice how many of those patterns continue to shape the modern media landscape. Whether on television or online, visibility has become a form of power, and attention has become a form of currency. Perhaps that's why Network feels less like an old movie and more like a mirror. It doesn't ask us to fear futuristic machines. It asks us to examine the invisible system we've slowly learned to accept without questioning. And maybe that's the film's most unsettling prediction of all. If one idea from this document stayed with you, write "attention is currency" in the comments. Because the final file may reveal something even more disturbing. What if Network didn't simply predict the media we live with today, but helped define the language through which we understand it? Did Network predict the future or help create it? At this point in the investigation, we can no longer ask whether Network made a few accurate predictions. The evidence points toward a far more uncomfortable possibility. What if the film wasn't trying to predict the future at all? What if Patty Chayefsky simply recognized a pattern that had already begun and understood where it would eventually lead? Technologies change. Television becomes the internet. Broadcast studios become smartphones. Newsrooms become social media feeds. But the mechanism remains remarkably familiar. Every platform competes for the same limited resource: human attention. The more attention something captures, the more valuable it becomes. The more valuable it becomes, the more every system is encouraged to produce even stronger emotional reactions. Little by little, outrage becomes profitable. Fear becomes profitable. Constant stimulation becomes profitable. Looking back from today's perspective, Network feels less like fiction and more like an early diagnosis of a culture that was only beginning to emerge. That may explain why the film continues to resonate with new generations nearly 50 years after its release. It isn't remembered because it guessed specific inventions. It's remembered because it exposed a cycle that still shapes the way information is produced, distributed, and consumed. Of course, no single film created the modern media landscape. History is always more complex than that. But powerful stories influence the way societies think about themselves. They give us new language, new metaphors, and sometimes new ways of recognizing problems that were already hiding in plain sight. Perhaps that's the real legacy of Network. It didn't tell us what the future would look like. It challenged us to notice what was already happening before it became impossible to ignore. And maybe that is why this file still feels unfinished. Because every time we open a news app, scroll through a social media feed, or watch another headline competing for our attention, the investigation quietly continues.
So before we close this archive, I'd like to leave you with one final question. Are we watching the media? Or is the media slowly teaching us what deserves our attention?
If this investigation made you look at network through a different lens, write "The broadcast never stopped" in the comments. I genuinely like to know your perspective, because the most interesting discussions often begin after the file is closed. And if you enjoy investigations that uncover the hidden connections between cinema and reality, subscribe to Shadow Reel and join us as we open the next forbidden file. Until then, keep questioning the screen. Keep investigating the archive, because every file has a story. Some should never be opened. File 005, closed. Or perhaps still broadcasting.